One click of a button, one moment of distraction, and a career reduced to ashes. Emily Vance had no idea that her private voicemail, in which she called her boss arrogant but dangerously attractive, had been sent to the entire company before sunrise. But Dominic Kane wasn't just an ordinary boss. He controlled the city's underground power structure, a name whispered in the shadows and a silent terror. Follow this story to the very end. Like and comment where you're starting from. I want to know how far this story has come. Emily Vance woke at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of her phone vibrating like a trapped hornet against the nightstand. She didn't open her eyes right away. The apartment was still dark, the kind of pre-dawn darkness that felt like borrowed time, and she wanted to hold on to it for just a few more seconds. Outside, Manhattan was already stirring, garbage trucks grinding through narrow streets, the distant wail of a siren, the metallic screech of a delivery gate being yanked open. The city never slept, and neither did anyone stupid enough to try to make it here. She reached for the phone without looking, her fingers fumbling across the cold surface of the table until they found it. The screen lit up her face in harsh blue light, and that's when she saw it. 43 notifications. Her stomach dropped. Emily sat up fast, the sheets tangling around her legs. She squinted at the screen, her brain still sluggish, trying to make sense of the names scrolling past. Colleagues, people she barely knew, people she didn't like, people whose entire job was to smell blood in the water and circle. The first message was from Lauren in HR. Emily, did you mean to send that? Her heart started to pound. She opened the message thread, scrolling up with shaking fingers, and there it was, her voice note. The one she'd recorded last night at 11:43 p.m., half drunk on cheap wine and exhausted from another 16-hour day. The one she'd sent to her best friend Rachel to vent about the impossible standards, the relentless pressure, the way Dominic Kane walked through the office like he owned not just the firm, but the air people breathed. Except she hadn't sent it to Rachel. She'd sent it to the company-wide Slack channel. Emily's mouth went dry. She tapped the audio file, and her own voice spilled out into the silent apartment, slurred and reckless, and so stupid. God, he's such an arrogant bastard. Like, who does he think he is? But I swear to God, Rach, there's something about him. It's dangerous. He's dangerous. And I hate that I find that attractive. I hate it. She threw the phone across the bed like it had burned her. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at the wall, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She was careful. She was precise. She didn't make mistakes like this. But the evidence was right there, time-stamped and irreversible. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Then another. She didn't look. She couldn't. Instead, she stood up, her legs unsteady, and walked to the window. The city stretched out below her, 1,000 lights glittering against the black, indifferent, and infinite. Somewhere out there, Dominic Kane was probably awake too. Probably already in his office on the 47th floor, reading reports, making decisions that would reshape entire industries before most people had their first coffee. And now he knew. He knew she'd called him arrogant. He knew she'd called him dangerous. And worse, so much worse, he knew she found him attractive. Emily pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. She was so screwed. By the time she walked into the office at 7:58 a.m., the damage was complete. She could feel it the moment she stepped off the elevator, the way conversation stopped mid-sentence, the way eyes tracked her across the open floor plan, the way people suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. No one said anything. They didn't have to. Emily kept her head up, her shoulders back, and walked straight to her desk like she wasn't dying inside. She set down her bag, smoothed her skirt, and booted up her laptop with hands that only trembled a little. Around her, the office hummed with the usual morning chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the espresso machine hissing in the break room. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Except it wasn't. She looked up. It was Jordan, one of the senior analysts, leaning against the partition with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face that made her want to throw her stapler at him. Not now, Jordan. Oh, come on. You can't drop a bomb like that and expect people not to talk about it. I said not now. He raised his hands in mock surrender, but the smirk didn't fade. For what it's worth, I think it took guts. Stupid, career-ending guts, but still. Emily didn't respond. She turned back to her screen and started typing. Anything. Just to look busy. Just to give her hands something to do. Jordan lingered for another few seconds, then pushed off the partition and walked away, whistling under his breath. She lasted another 20 minutes before Lauren from HR appeared at her desk, all tight smiles and careful professionalism. Emily, do you have a minute? It wasn't a question. Emily followed her into one of the glass-walled conference rooms, the kind designed to give the illusion of transparency while offering absolutely none. Lauren closed the door and gestured to a chair. Emily sat. Her pulse was hammering in her ears. So, Lauren said, folding her hands on the table, I'm sure you're aware of the situation. I'm aware. Good. That makes this easier. Lauren's smile didn't reach her eyes. Look, Emily, I'm not here to lecture you. What's done is done. But I need to know, was this intentional? Some kind of statement? Emily stared at her. Are you serious? I have to ask. No, Lauren, it wasn't intentional. It was a mistake. A stupid, humiliating mistake. Lauren nodded slowly, like she was processing this information through several layers of corporate protocol. Okay, that's good. That's what I'll note in the file. Now, the next step is I get fired, right? Lauren hesitated. Not necessarily. Emily laughed, a short, bitter sound. Come on. We both know how this works. I embarrassed the company. I embarrassed him. There's no coming back from that. That's not up to me, Lauren said carefully. Mr. Kane will make that determination. And just like that, the air went out of the room. Emily's throat tightened. When? There's a meeting at 9. He wants to see you. Of course he did. The 47th floor was a different world. Quieter. Colder. The elevator doors opened onto a sleek reception area done in shades of charcoal and steel, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a conquest. Emily's heels clicked against the polished marble as she walked toward the executive suite, each step echoing louder than the last. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a gaze that could cut glass, looked up from her desk. Ms. Vance? Yes? He's expecting you. Go ahead. Emily nodded and walked past her down a short hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her yearly salary. At the end of the hall was a set of double doors, partially open. She could see a sliver of the office beyond, dark wood, leather, the edge of a massive desk. She took a breath, knocked twice, and pushed the door open. Dominic Kane was standing by the window with his back to her, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a phone to his ear. He didn't turn around. I don't care what the lawyers say, he said into the phone, his voice low and flat. Make it happen. I want the contract signed by Friday, or we pull out entirely. A pause. Then find leverage. You have 48 hours. He hung up without saying goodbye and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. Only then did he turn around. Emily had seen Dominic Kane 100 times before, in meetings, in the elevator, across the crowded floor during all-hands presentations. But she'd never been alone with him, never this close. And the difference was staggering. He was tall, easily 6'2", with the kind of build that suggested he didn't just sit behind a desk all day. His suit was tailored to perfection, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, and his dark hair was swept back in a way that looked effortless but probably wasn't. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Dark, sharp, unreadable. The kind of eyes that missed nothing. He didn't smile. Ms. Vance, he said. Sit down. It wasn't a suggestion. Emily sat in one of the leather chairs across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. Dominic walked past her, close enough that she caught the faint scent of expensive cologne, something clean and sharp, like cold air and cedar, and settled into his own chair. He didn't lean back. He didn't relax. He just looked at her. The silence stretched. Emily forced herself to meet his gaze. I'm sorry? For what? The question caught her off guard. For the voice note. For what I said. It was unprofessional and inappropriate, and you called me arrogant. Her face burned. Yes. And dangerous. Yes. And attractive. Emily wanted to disappear, to melt into the chair and cease to exist, but she didn't look away. Yes. Dominic leaned forward slightly, his fingers laced together on the desk. 2 out of 3 isn't bad. She blinked. I'm sorry? I am arrogant, he said, his tone conversational, almost amused. And I am dangerous, but whether I'm attractive. He tilted his head. That's subjective. Emily's brain stalled. She had no idea what to say. Was this a joke? A test? Was he toying with her before he fired her? I expected you to fire me, she said finally. I know. So, are you? Dominic studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he reached for a folder on his desk and slid it across to her. Open it. Emily hesitated, then picked up the folder. Inside was a stack of documents, contracts, proposals, financial projections. At the top was a cover sheet with a single line in bold. West Coast Expansion Initiative, lead strategist Emily Vance. She looked up, confused. I don't understand. You're not being fired, Ms. Vance. You're being promoted. The words didn't make sense. Emily shook her head. That's not... I don't. You made a mistake, Dominic said, cutting her off. A careless one. But I'm not interested in punishing you for being human. I'm interested in whether you can handle pressure, whether you can think on your feet, whether you can survive in a room full of people who want to see you fail. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. So far you've done all 3. Emily's mouth was dry. This is a test. Everything is a test. She looked down at the folder again, her mind racing. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. People didn't get promoted for humiliating themselves. They got escorted out by security. Why? She asked. Why what? Why me? There are a dozen other people in this firm who could run this project. People with more experience, more credibility. Dominic's expression didn't change. Because those people are predictable. And I don't need predictable right now. I need someone who's hungry. Someone who has something to prove. He paused. Someone who's willing to take risks. Emily's pulse quickened. She wanted to argue, to push back. But the truth was she did have something to prove. She'd spent the last 3 years clawing her way up from the bottom, fighting for every scrap of recognition, every inch of ground, and now he was offering her the kind of opportunity that could change everything, or destroy her completely. What's the catch? She asked. Dominic smiled, just a little. It didn't reach his eyes. You'll report directly to me. Every decision, every move, every meeting, I'll be watching. If you succeed, you'll have more power than you ever thought possible. If you fail... He let the sentence hang. Emily swallowed hard. If I fail? Then you'll wish I'd fired you today. The air in the room felt thinner, heavier. Emily looked down at the folder again, at the contracts and projections and all the impossible promises they represented. This was insane. This was a trap. But it was also a way out. A way to prove that she wasn't just the girl who made a stupid mistake. A way to show everyone, including herself, that she belonged here. She looked up at Dominic, her jaw set. When do I start? Tomorrow. There's a flight to Los Angeles at 6 a.m. Be on it. Emily stood, the folder clutched in her hands. She should have felt relieved, grateful, but all she felt was a creeping sense of dread, like she'd just signed a contract she didn't fully understand. She turned to leave, but Dominic's voice stopped her at the door. Miss Vance? She looked back. For the record, he said, his dark eyes locking onto hers, you were right about one thing. What's that? I am dangerous. Oh, Emily didn't remember leaving his office. Didn't remember getting back on the elevator, or walking through the lobby, or stepping out onto the street. The city roared around her, taxis honking, pedestrians shoving past, the sharp bite of exhaust and hot pretzels, and someone's spilled coffee. But it all felt distant, muffled, like she was moving through water. She found herself in a coffee shop 3 blocks away, sitting in the back corner with a latte she didn't remember ordering. Her phone was face down on the table, still buzzing with messages she wasn't ready to read. The folder sat next to it, innocuous and terrifying in equal measure. She opened it again, scanning the first few pages. The West Coast expansion was massive. New offices, new clients, new partnerships worth hundreds of millions. It was the kind of project that could make or break a career. and Dominic had just handed it to her. Why? The question gnawed at her. He'd said she was hungry, that she had something to prove, and that was true. But there had to be more to it. Men like Dominic Kane didn't make decisions based on intuition or sympathy. Everything he did was calculated, deliberate, precise, which meant he wanted something from her. She just didn't know what yet. Her phone buzzed again. This time she picked it up. A text from Rachel, all caps and frantic. "What the hell happened? Are you okay? Call me." Emily typed back quickly. "I'm fine. I'll explain later, promise." Another buzz. This one from her mom, who somehow always knew when something was wrong, even from 3 states away. Saw something on LinkedIn. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Emily closed her eyes and let out a long breath. Of course it was on LinkedIn. Of course the entire industry probably knew by now. She could already picture the think pieces, the hot takes, the endless dissection of her failure by people who'd never taken a real risk in their lives. But she wasn't fired. She was promoted. And that changed everything. The flight to Los Angeles left at 6:03 a.m., which meant Emily was at JFK by 4:30, bleary-eyed and running on 2 hours of sleep and enough coffee to kill a small animal. She checked in, made it through security, and found her gate with 15 minutes to spare. The terminal was nearly empty, just a handful of business travelers staring at their laptops and a maintenance crew buffing the floors. Emily found a seat by the window and pulled out the folder again, reviewing the details she'd already memorized. The meetings were scheduled back-to-back for 3 days. Investors, partners, real estate developers. She'd be representing the firm, which meant representing Dominic. No pressure. "Ms. Vance?" She looked up. A man in his early 40s was standing a few feet away, dressed in a dark suit with a crisp white shirt and no tie. He had the kind of face that was hard to read. Sharp features, pale eyes, a thin mouth that looked like it didn't smile often. "Yes?" "I'm Marcus. Mr. Kane asked me to accompany you." Emily frowned. "Accompany me?" "Security detail," Marcus said simply. He thought it would be prudent. "Security for what?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his expression flat and unreadable. "The people you'll be meeting with aren't always predictable. Mr. Kane prefers to take precautions." A chill ran down Emily's spine. She wanted to ask more questions. Who these people were, what kind of precautions Dominic thought were necessary, why the hell she needed a bodyguard for a business trip. But something in Marcus's eyes told her she wouldn't get answers. "Okay," she said slowly. "Thanks." Marcus nodded once and took a seat a few rows away, his gaze already scanning the terminal like a predator cataloging threats. Emily turned back to the window, her reflection staring back at her against the dark glass. Somewhere behind her, Marcus sat motionless and silent. And somewhere out there, in a city she'd never been to, people were waiting for her. People Dominic thought were dangerous enough to require security. She closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. This was fine. This was all fine. She'd survived the worst humiliation of her life and come out the other side with a promotion. She could handle a few meetings. She could handle Dominic's scrutiny. She could handle whatever came next. At least that's what she told herself. Los Angeles hit her like a wall of heat and light. The moment she stepped off the plane, the air wrapped around her, dry, relentless, nothing like the humid crush of New York. Palm trees lined the roads outside the terminal, absurdly tall and skinny, swaying in a breeze that smelled like gasoline and something faintly floral. Marcus led her to a black SUV waiting at the curb, its engine already running. "Where are we going?" Emily asked as she climbed into the back seat. "The hotel first," Marcus said. "You have 2 hours before the first meeting." 2 hours. Barely enough time to shower and change and try to look like she hadn't spent the last 48 hours spiraling. The SUV pulled into traffic, merging smoothly onto the highway. Emily watched the city slide past. Billboards advertising movies and lawyers and plastic surgery, sprawling strip malls, clusters of mid-rise buildings that looked like they'd been assembled from a kit. It was so different from New York. Wider, flatter, less urgent, but no less dangerous, apparently. "Marcus," she said after a few minutes of silence, "what exactly does Dominic think is going to happen at these meetings?" Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I'm not authorized to discuss Mr. Kane's concerns." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Emily bit back a response and turned to stare out the window. Fine. If Dominic wanted to play cryptic, she'd figure it out herself. The hotel was in Santa Monica, right on the beach, a sleek modern tower with floor-to-ceiling windows and a lobby that smelled like expensive candles. Marcus escorted her to the 11th floor, waited while she unlocked her room, and then stationed himself outside her door like a sentinel. "I'll knock when it's time to leave," he said. Emily closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She looked around the room, king bed, pristine white linens, a desk with a view of the ocean. Under any other circumstances, this would have felt like a dream. But right now, it just felt like the calm before a storm. She showered quickly, changed into a tailored navy suit, and forced herself to eat half a protein bar even though her stomach was in knots. By the time Marcus knocked, she'd reviewed her notes 3 more times and was as ready as she was ever going to be. The first meeting was in a glass-walled office overlooking the Pacific. The investor, a man named Richard Chen, was in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from too much time on a yacht. He greeted Emily with a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ms. Vance, Dominic speaks very highly of you." Emily doubted that, but she smiled back. "I'm looking forward to working together." They sat at a conference table, Marcus standing silently by the door. Richard spread out a set of documents, projections, timelines, risk assessments. Emily walked him through the expansion plan, highlighting the growth potential, the market analysis, the strategic advantages. She was good at this part. She'd spent years learning how to sell an idea, how to make people believe in something that didn't exist yet. But halfway through her presentation, Richard held up a hand. "Let me ask you something, Ms. Vance. How much do you know about Dominic's other ventures?" Emily hesitated. "I'm familiar with the firm's portfolio." "That's not what I asked." The room suddenly felt smaller. Emily glanced at Marcus, but his expression gave nothing away. "I know what I need to know," she said carefully. Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's a diplomatic answer. Let me be less diplomatic. Dominic Kane doesn't build empires by playing fair. He builds them by knowing where the bodies are buried, sometimes literally." Emily's pulse quickened. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact." Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes sharp. "You're smart, Ms. Vance, smart enough to have gotten this far. But are you smart enough to know when you're in over your head?" Emily forced herself to hold his gaze. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." For a long moment, Richard just looked at her. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Fair enough. Let's talk numbers." The meeting lasted another hour. By the end of it, Emily's hands were cramping from taking notes, and her head was spinning with details and contingencies, and the growing certainty that she'd just stepped into something much bigger than a business deal. As they left the building, Marcus opened the car door for her without a word. Emily slid into the back seat, her mind racing. "That went well," she said, more to herself than to him. Marcus didn't respond. "He was testing me," Emily continued, "trying to see if I'd crack." Still nothing. Emily looked at him in the rear-view mirror. "Do you ever talk?" "When necessary." "And this isn't necessary?" "No." Emily sighed and leaned back against the seat. Fine, let him be silent. She had bigger problems. Like the fact that Richard Chen had all but confirmed that Dominic Kane was involved in things that had nothing to do with corporate strategy. Things that required bodyguards and coded language and meetings in cities 3,000 miles from home. Things that could get her killed. The second meeting was worse. The investor was a woman named Vanessa Hale, early 50s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes like chips of ice. She met Emily in a restaurant overlooking the ocean, a place so expensive that the menu didn't have prices. Vanessa ordered for both of them without asking, seared scallops, some kind of salad Emily couldn't pronounce, and then got straight to business. "Dominic sent you because he's testing you," Vanessa said, swirling her wine. "You know that, right?" Emily kept her expression neutral. "I'm here to present the expansion plan." "Bullshit." Vanessa leaned forward, her voice low. "You're here because he wants to see if you'll break, if you'll run, if you'll ask the wrong questions." "And what are the wrong questions?" Vanessa smiled. "The ones you're smart enough not to ask." Emily's stomach twisted. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Vanessa took a sip of wine, her gaze never leaving Emily's face. You've already figured out that Dominic isn't just a businessman. You've seen the edges of it, the security, the meetings, the way people talk about him like he's something more than human. And now you're wondering how deep it goes. Emily didn't respond. Here's my advice, Vanessa said. Don't wonder, don't dig, do your job, take your promotion, and pretend you don't see what's right in front of you. Because once you see it, really see it, there's no going back. And if I can't do that? Vanessa's smile faded. Then you'll end up like the last person who asked too many questions. And trust me, you don't want that. The words hung in the air like a threat. Emily forced herself to take a bite of scallop, even though it tasted like ash. Across the table, Vanessa watched her with the kind of calm that came from having already won. By the time the meal ended, Emily's hands were shaking. That night, she stood on the balcony of her hotel room and stared out at the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, relentless and indifferent, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dominic. How did the meetings go? Emily stared at the message for a long time. She could lie. She could say everything was fine, that the investors were on board, that the expansion was moving forward exactly as planned, but she didn't. Instead, she typed, "We need to talk." The response came almost immediately. "I'll be there tomorrow." Emily set the phone down and closed her eyes, the ocean roaring below her like a warning. She'd crossed a line today. She'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see, heard things she wasn't supposed to hear. And now Dominic was coming. Not to congratulate her, to see if she'd survive what came next. Dominic Kane arrived in Los Angeles at 10:47 p.m., and Emily knew because Marcus knocked on her door exactly 3 minutes later. "He's downstairs," Marcus said, lobby bar. Emily didn't ask how Dominic had gotten there so fast or why he hadn't called first. She just grabbed her room key and followed Marcus to the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs. The hotel was quiet at this hour, the hallways empty except for the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner and the muffled sound of a television through one of the doors. The elevator descended in silence. Emily caught her reflection in the polished doors, hair pulled back, face pale, eyes too wide. She looked like someone who'd seen a ghost, or maybe someone who was about to become one. The lobby bar was dim and nearly empty. Low lighting, dark leather booze, the kind of jazz playing so quietly, it might as well have been silence. Dominic was sitting in the corner, a glass of whiskey in front of him, his jacket draped over the back of the chair. He'd loosened his tie but hadn't taken it off. He looked tired, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd looked angry. He saw her and gestured to the seat across from him. Emily sat. Marcus took up position near the entrance, far enough away to give them privacy but close enough to intervene if needed. She wondered what exactly he thought might happen. "You wanted to talk," Dominic said. His voice was quiet, controlled. "So talk." Emily swallowed hard. "What am I doing here?" "You're running the West Coast expansion." "No, what am I really doing here?" Dominic took a slow sip of whiskey, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "You're going to have to be more specific." "Richard Chen told me you don't play fair. Vanessa Hale told me not to ask questions. And I've got a bodyguard who acts like we're in a war zone." Emily leaned forward, her voice low and sharp. "So I'll ask again, what the hell am I doing here?" For a long moment, Dominic didn't respond. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he set down his glass and leaned back in his chair. "You're here because I needed someone who could walk into a room full of sharks and not flinch," he said. "Someone smart enough to read the subtext but disciplined enough not to panic. And so far, you've done exactly that." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting tonight." Emily's jaw tightened. "Richard Chen said you know where the bodies are buried. Vanessa said the last person who asked too many questions didn't end well. So either tell me what I'm actually involved in, or I'm on the next flight back to New York." Dominic's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of something that might have been respect, or might have been warning. "You think you can just walk away?" he asked quietly. "Watch me. You signed a contract, Emily. You accepted the promotion. You took the meetings. You're already in." "Then get me out." Dominic laughed, a short, humorless sound. "It doesn't work like that." "Then make it work." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost dangerous. "You want the truth? Fine. The people you're meeting with aren't just investors. They're players in a game that's been running long before you showed up. They move money, they move power, and sometimes they move things that would make you lose sleep for the rest of your life. And yes, I'm part of that world. I've been part of it since I was 23 years old, and I'm very, very good at it. Emily's stomach twisted. So what does that make me? That makes you someone who can help me expand into new territory without raising red flags. Someone clean, someone credible. He paused. Someone expendable, if it comes to that. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. You're using me. I'm giving you an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. And if I refuse, Dominic's gaze hardened, then you'll find out very quickly that there are consequences for breaking agreements with me. And I promise you, Emily, you won't like them. She wanted to scream, to throw her drink in his face, to walk out and never look back. But she couldn't, because he was right. She'd already signed the papers. She'd already taken the meetings. She'd already seen too much. Why me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You could have picked anyone. Because you're hungry, Dominic said simply. And hunger makes people dangerous. I needed someone dangerous. Emily stared at him, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to run, to get as far away from this man and this world as possible. But another part of her, a darker, quieter part, whispered that maybe he was right. Maybe she was dangerous. Maybe that's exactly what she needed to be. I want out after this project, she said finally. No more meetings, no more games. I do this, and then I'm done. Dominic smiled, just a little. We'll see. That's not good enough. It's all you're getting. Emily stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need air. She walked out of this bar before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She made it to the beach before the tears started. Hot, furious tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand as she stood barefoot in the sand, the ocean roaring in front of her like it was trying to drown out her thoughts. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She didn't turn around. You should go back inside, Dominic said. Leave me alone. It's not safe out here. Emily laughed bitterly. I'm not safe anywhere. Not anymore. He didn't respond right away. When she finally turned to look at him, he was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. I didn't lie to you, he said quietly. I told you I was dangerous. I told you this would be a test. You chose to stay. I didn't know what I was choosing. Yes, you did. You just didn't want to admit it. Emily shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I can't do this. Yes, you can. How do you know? Dominic took a step closer, close enough that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Because you're still standing here. Because you didn't run the moment Vanessa Hale warned you off. Because you called me out in that bar instead of pretending everything was fine. He paused. You're stronger than you think, Emily, and that terrifies you. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just stood there, the ocean crashing behind her, and let herself feel the weight of everything she'd stepped into. What happens now? She asked finally. Now you decide, Dominic said. You can walk away, and I'll make sure you're taken care of, safe, comfortable, but you'll never know what you're capable of. Or you can stay, finish what we started, and see just how far you can go. Emily closed her eyes. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and the sand was cold beneath her feet, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. When she opened her eyes, Dominic was still watching her. I'll stay, she said, but if you lie to me again, I'm gone, and I don't care what the consequences are. Dominic nodded slowly. Fair enough. They stood there for another moment, the space between them charged with something Emily couldn't name. Then he turned and walked back toward the hotel, leaving her alone with the ocean and the weight of her decision. The next morning, Emily woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. She grabbed it, still half asleep, and saw 3 missed calls from Rachel and a text from her mother. She ignored both and opened her email instead. At the top of her inbox was a message from Dominic, sent at 6:14 a.m. Meeting at noon. Dress sharp. This one matters. No explanation, no details, just an order. Emily threw the phone onto the bed and dragged herself into the shower. letting the hot water beat against her shoulders until her skin turned pink. She felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything inside her and left only the shell behind. But she got dressed anyway. Navy suit, white blouse, heels that made her 3 inches taller and twice as confident. By the time Marcus knocked on her door at 11:30, she looked like someone who had her life together. She just hoped the performance would hold. The meeting was in a penthouse suite overlooking downtown Los Angeles, the kind of place that had its own private elevator and a doorman who looked like he could break someone in half without breaking a sweat. Marcus led her inside, and Emily found herself in a sprawling living room with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that probably cost more than her car. There were 4 men waiting for her. 3 of them were in their 50s or 60s, dressed in expensive suits, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. The 4th was younger, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He was leaning against the window, watching her with an expression that made her skin crawl. Dominic was standing near the bar, a glass of water in his hand. He looked up when she walked in and gave her a barely perceptible nod. "Gentlemen," Dominic said, setting down his glass, "this is Emily Vance. She'll be leading the expansion." One of the older men, a tall, silver-haired man with a deep tan, stepped forward and extended his hand. "Ms. Vance, I'm Gerald Moss. Pleasure to meet you." Emily shook his hand, forcing a smile. "Likewise." Gerald gestured to the others. "This is Alan Briggs, Thomas Keller, and Marco Delgado." Marco, the one with the scar. He didn't move from the window, just gave her a slow, deliberate once-over that made her want to take a shower. "Let's get started," Dominic said, cutting through the tension. They sat around a massive glass table, and Emily pulled out her presentation. For the next 40 minutes, she walked them through the expansion plan. Market analysis, projected revenue, timelines. She was thorough, precise, professional. And the entire time she could feel Marco's eyes on her. When she finished, Gerald leaned back in his chair and nodded approvingly. "Impressive. You've done your homework." "Thank you." "I have one question," Marco said, his voice low and rough. "How much does she know?" The room went silent. Emily's pulse spiked. She looked at Dominic, but his expression gave nothing away. "She knows what she needs to know," Dominic said evenly. Marco smirked. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting." The 2 men stared at each other, the air between them crackling with something that felt like violence waiting to happen. Finally, Marco shrugged and looked away. "Fine. But if this goes sideways, it's on you." "Noted." The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Gerald and the others shook Emily's hand and congratulated her on a job well done, but Marco just walked out without a word. Emily watched him go, her stomach churning. Once they were alone, Emily turned to Dominic. "What the hell was that?" "That was Marco reminding me that he doesn't trust you." "Why?" "Because you're new. And in this world, new means unpredictable." Emily's hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists to make it stop. "And what happens if he decides I'm too unpredictable?" Dominic looked at her for a long moment. "Then I'll handle it." That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the meeting in her head. Marco's smirk. Gerald's calm approval, the way Dominic had deflected every question about what she knew. She grabbed her phone and pulled up Marco Delgado's name, running a quick search. What she found made her blood run cold. Marco Delgado. 34 years old, born in Tijuana, raised in East LA. No official criminal record, but his name appeared in dozens of articles about organized crime, money laundering, and offshore accounts. There were photos of him at charity galas, shaking hands with politicians and CEOs. And in every single photo, he looked like a predator pretending to be human. Emily set the phone down, her hands trembling. She'd walked into meetings with investors before. She'd negotiated deals, closed contracts, navigated corporate politics. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was survival. A knock at the door made her jump. She got out of bed, her heart racing, and looked through the peephole. It was Dominic. Emily opened the door, suddenly very aware that she was wearing an oversized t-shirt and nothing else. "It's 1 a.m. "I know. Can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. Dominic walked into the room, his tie gone, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "What do you want?" Emily asked, crossing her arms. To make sure you're okay. I'm fine. You're lying. Emily laughed bitterly. Yeah, well, I'm getting good at that. Dominic walked to the window and looked out at the city, his hands in his pockets. Marco's not going to be a problem. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because if he tries anything, I'll make sure he regrets it. Emily stared at his back, trying to read the tension in his shoulders. Why do you care? Because you're useful to me. That's all? Dominic turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression. Something that looked almost like guilt. No, he said quietly. That's not all. The air between them shifted, charged with something Emily didn't know how to name. She should have told him to leave, should have drawn a line and stuck to it. But she didn't. Instead, she took a step closer. Then what is it? Dominic's jaw tightened. You remind me of someone. Who? Myself. Before I knew better. Emily's breath caught. And how did that turn out for you? I'm still alive. That's more than most people can say. They stood there, the space between them shrinking with every second. Emily could feel the heat radiating off him, could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his eyes tracked every movement she made. This is a bad idea, she whispered. I know. We shouldn't, but she didn't finish the sentence, because Dominic closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cup the side of her face, and then his mouth was on hers, urgent, demanding, like he'd been holding back for too long and couldn't anymore. Emily kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. It was reckless and stupid, and probably the worst decision she'd ever made, but she didn't care. Because for the first time in days, she felt something other than fear. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Dominic rested his forehead against hers, his hand still tangled in her hair. This complicates things, he said. Yeah, it does. We should stop. We should. But neither of them moved, and then Emily's phone rang. The sound shattered the moment like glass. Emily stepped back, her heart still racing, and grabbed the phone off the nightstand. The number was blocked. She answered anyway. Hello? There was a pause, then a voice, low, distorted, unrecognizable. You should have stayed in New York, Ms. Vance. Emily's blood turned to ice. Who is this? Someone who knows what you're getting into, and trust me, you're not ready for it. The line went dead. Emily stared at the phone, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Dominic was beside her in an instant, his expression hard. What did they say? They said I should have stayed in New York. Dominic took the phone from her and checked the call log, his jaw tight. It's a burner. Untraceable. Who would? I don't know. But I'm going to find out. He pulled out his own phone and made a call, his voice clipped and furious. I need a trace on a blocked number. Now. Emily sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind spinning. Someone was watching her. Someone knew where she was, what she was doing, maybe even what room she was staying in. And they wanted her scared. It was working. Dominic hung up and crouched in front of her, his hands on her knees. Look at me. She did. This is what I was trying to protect you from, he said quietly. This is why I brought Marcus, why I kept you at arm's length. Because the moment you stepped into this world, you became a target. Then why did you bring me here at all? Because I thought you could handle it. And now? Dominic's expression softened, just a fraction. Now I'm not so sure. Emily wanted to be angry, to tell him he didn't get to make that call. But she was too tired, too scared, too far in to pretend she had control over any of this. What do I do? She asked. You stay close. You don't go anywhere without Marcus, and you trust me. I don't even know you. Then start learning. The next 2 days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Emily moved through them like a ghost, smiling when she was supposed to smile, nodding when she was supposed to nod, but never fully present. The phone call had shaken something loose inside her, and she couldn't put it back. Dominic was always nearby, in the meetings, in the hallways, sometimes in her room late at night when the silence got too loud. They didn't talk about what had happened between them. They didn't talk about the kiss or the way his hand had felt in her hair or the fact that every time he looked at her, something in her chest tightened. They just worked. But the tension was building. Emily could feel it in the way Marco watched her during meetings, in the way Vanessa's warnings echoed in her head, in the way every phone call made her jump. On the third night, everything came to a head. Emily was in her room, reviewing notes, when Marcus knocked on the door. She opened it to find him holding a phone, not hers. "Mr. Kane needs to see you," he said. "Now." "What's wrong?" "Just come." Emily followed him down to the lobby, her heart pounding. Dominic was waiting by the entrance, his face grim. "Get in the car," he said. "What?" "Now, Emily." She got in. Marcus drove, and Dominic sat beside her in the back seat, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Emily wanted to ask what was happening, but the look on his face told her to wait. They drove for 20 minutes, winding through narrow streets until they reached a warehouse district near the docks. Marcus parked in front of a nondescript building, and Dominic got out without a word. Emily followed. Inside, the warehouse was dim and cold, the kind of place that smelled like rust and old concrete. There were a dozen men scattered around, some she recognized from the meetings, some she didn't. And in the center of the room, tied to a chair with blood dripping from his nose, was a man Emily had never seen before. Marco was standing next to him, a gun in his hand. Emily's breath caught. "What the hell is this?" Dominic didn't answer. He walked straight to Marco, his expression cold. "Is he the one?" Dominic asked. Marco nodded. "He's been feeding information to the feds. We caught him making a call an hour ago." Dominic looked down at the man in the chair. "Who are you working for?" The man spat blood onto the floor. "Go to hell!" Marco hit him, hard. The crack of knuckles against bone echoed through the warehouse. Emily flinched. "I'll ask again," Dominic said, his voice calm. "Who are you working for?" The man laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "You're already dead, Kane. All of you." Dominic stared at him for a long moment. Then he pulled a gun from his jacket, smooth, practiced, like he'd done it 1,000 times before, and pressed it to the man's temple. Emily's heart stopped. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic didn't look at her. "Go back to the car, Emily." "Dominic, don't—" "I said go back to the car." But she couldn't move. She stood there, frozen, as Dominic's finger tightened on the trigger. And then he pulled it. The gunshot was deafening. The man's head snapped back and then he slumped forward, lifeless. Emily's legs gave out. She hit the ground hard, her ears ringing, her vision blurring. She thought she might throw up, thought she might scream. But no sound came out. Dominic holstered the gun and turned to Marco. "Clean this up. I want him gone by morning." Marco nodded. Then Dominic walked over to Emily and crouched beside her. She flinched when he reached for her, but he didn't pull back. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Now you know," he said quietly. "This is who I am. This is what I do. And if you stay, this is what you'll be part of." Emily stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "You should have let me walk away," she whispered. "I know," Dominic said, "but it's too late for that now." He stood and walked out of the warehouse, leaving Emily kneeling on the cold concrete, surrounded by men who didn't even blink at what they'd just witnessed. And she realized, with a sickening clarity, that he was right. There was no going back. Emily didn't remember getting back to the hotel, didn't remember Marcus half carrying her to the car, or the drive through the empty streets, or the elevator ride up to her floor. The first thing she registered was the sound of running water and the realization that she was sitting on the bathroom floor, fully clothed, with the shower spraying cold water over her head. Marcus was standing in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and clipped. "She's in shock." "No, she's not injured. Just get him up here." Emily stared at the tile beneath her hands. There was blood on her palms, not hers, she realized distantly, spatter from the warehouse floor. She tried to wipe it off on her pants, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The water turned warm. Someone must have adjusted it. She didn't look up to see who. "Emily." Dominic's voice cut through the fog. "Look at me." She didn't want to, couldn't, because if she looked at him, she'd see the man who'd just put a bullet in someone's skull without hesitation, the man who'd stood there afterwards like it meant nothing, like death was just another transaction to be completed and forgotten. "Emily." This time his hand was on her chin, forcing her head up. His face swam into focus, jaw tight, eyes dark, expression unreadable. He changed his shirt. The one from the warehouse was probably already burning somewhere. You need to breathe, he said. I am breathing. No, you're hyperventilating. Was she? Emily tried to focus on her lungs, on the air moving in and out, but it felt wrong. Too fast. Too shallow. Like her body had forgotten how to do the one thing it was supposed to do automatically. Dominic reached into the shower and turned off the water. Then he grabbed a towel and wrapped it around her shoulders, his movements efficient and impersonal. Like he'd done this before. Like shock was just another problem to be managed. Marcus, get her some dry clothes, Dominic said without looking away from her. Marcus disappeared. Emily's teeth started to chatter. The warmth from the shower was already fading, replaced by a bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with temperature. You killed him, she said. Her voice sounded strange, distant. Yes. He was tied to a chair. Yes. And you just... Her throat closed. She couldn't finish the sentence. Dominic crouched in front of her, still holding her gaze. He was a federal informant. If we'd let him walk, everyone in that room would be in custody by morning, including you. I didn't ask for this. You accepted the promotion. You took the meetings. You stood in that warehouse instead of waiting in the car. His voice was calm, matter of fact. You made choices, Emily. Now you live with them. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him it wasn't the same thing, that signing a contract wasn't the same as witnessing an execution, that she'd never agreed to any of this, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, in a place she didn't want to examine too closely, she knew he was right. She had made choices, and every single one had led her here. Marcus returned with a set of hotel sweats and a t-shirt. Dominic took them and handed them to Emily. Get changed. We're leaving in 20 minutes. Leaving? Where? New York. This operation is compromised. We need to move. Emily's hands tightened on the towel. What about the expansion, the investors? The expansion is dead. The investors will scatter, and if we're lucky, the feds won't connect the dots before we're in the air. Dominic stood, his expression hardening. 20 minutes, Emily. Don't make me come back. He walked out. Marcus followed, closing the door behind them. Emily sat there for another 30 seconds, shivering in her wet clothes, before she finally forced herself to stand. Her legs were unsteady, but they held. She peeled off her soaked shirt and pants, her movements mechanical, and pulled on the dry clothes. They were too big, hanging loose on her frame, but they were warm. In the mirror, she looked like a stranger. Hair plastered to her skull, face pale, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She looked like someone who'd seen something they couldn't unsee. She looked like exactly what she was. The flight back to New York was a private jet, sleek, expensive, and completely silent. Emily sat in one of the leather seats near the back, staring out the window at the darkness beyond. Somewhere below, California was disappearing into the distance. She should have felt relief, should have felt something other than this yawning emptiness. But she didn't. Dominic was at the front of the cabin on the phone, his voice too low to hear. He'd been making calls since they boarded, to lawyers, she assumed, or fixers, or whoever you called when you needed to make a body disappear and a federal investigation go away. Marcus sat across the aisle from her, eyes closed, arms crossed, looking like he was asleep. But Emily knew better. Men like Marcus didn't sleep. They just waited. She closed her own eyes and tried to think, tried to piece together what had happened and what it meant and where the hell she was supposed to go from here. But her mind kept circling back to the same moment, Dominic's finger on the trigger, the deafening crack of the gunshot, the way the man's head had snapped back. She'd read about violence, seen it in movies. But this was different. This was real, and it had happened 3 feet away from her. You should eat something. Emily opened her eyes. Dominic was standing in the aisle, holding a bottle of water and a wrapped sandwich. I'm not hungry. I don't care. You haven't eaten in 12 hours. He set both items on the tray in front of her and sat down in the seat across from hers. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He looked older than he had 3 days ago. How do you do it? Emily asked. Do what? Kill someone and then just move on, like it didn't happen. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. You don't move on. You just learn to carry it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Emily looked down at her hands. The blood was gone, scrubbed away in the hotel shower, but she could still feel it, like a stain that went deeper than skin. I can't do this, she said. Yes, you can. You don't know that. I do. Because you're still here. Dominic leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You could have run, could have called the police, the FBI, anyone. But you didn't. You got in the car. You got on the plane. You're still here. Maybe I'm just in shock. Maybe. Or maybe you're stronger than you think. Emily laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Stronger. Right. Is that what you call it when you watch someone die and don't even try to stop it? I call it survival. I call it cowardice. Dominic's expression didn't change. Call it whatever you want. But you're alive, and in this world, that's all that matters. Emily wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that there were things more important than survival, that some lines shouldn't be crossed no matter what. But she was too tired, too broken. And part of her, the part she hated, wondered if he might be right. She picked up the water and took a long drink. It was cold and clean and tasted like nothing. What happens when we land? She asked. You go home. You don't talk to anyone about what happened. You don't answer questions if the feds come knocking. And you wait. For what? For me to clean this up. Emily set down the bottle. And if you can't? Dominic's eyes locked onto hers. Then we both disappear. And trust me, you don't want that. They landed at Teterboro just after 3 a.m. The tarmac was empty except for a black SUV waiting near the hangar. Marcus drove Emily back to her apartment in silence, the city sliding past the windows like a half-remembered dream. By the time they pulled up to her building, the sky was starting to lighten, that pale, sickly gray that came before dawn. Get some sleep, Marcus said as she got out. Emily almost laughed. Sleep? Like that was even possible. She rode the elevator up to her floor, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. When she unlocked her door, the apartment felt wrong, too quiet, too normal, like the last 72 hours had happened to someone else. She dropped her bag on the floor and walked to the window. Manhattan stretched out below her, already waking up, cabs honking, delivery trucks rumbling, the distant wail of a siren. The city never stopped, never mourned, never cared. Emily pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. She stayed like that until the sun came up. The next 3 days were a blur. Emily called in sick to work, something she'd never done before, and spent most of her time in the apartment, pacing, sleeping in 20-minute bursts, jumping every time her phone buzzed. She kept expecting the knock on the door, the federal agents with their badges and their questions, the inevitable collapse of everything. But it never came. On the 4th day, her phone rang. Not a text. An actual call. From a number she didn't recognize. She answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? Ms. Vance, this is Special Agent Sarah Reeves with the FBI. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your recent trip to Los Angeles. Emily's heart stopped. She sat down hard on the couch, her mind racing. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. I think you do. You met with several individuals currently under investigation for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. We have records of the meetings, Ms. Vance, and we have reason to believe you may have witnessed a homicide. The room tilted. Emily gripped the edge of the couch to steady herself. I want a lawyer, she said. That's your right. But I should tell you, we're not interested in prosecuting you. We're interested in Dominic Kane, and if you cooperate, we can make this go away. Emily's hands were shaking. I need to think about it. You have 24 hours. After that, we'll be forced to proceed without your cooperation. And I promise you, Miss Vance, you don't want that. Agent Reeves paused. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. Emily sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in her hand. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. The FBI knew. They knew about the meetings, about the warehouse, maybe even about the body. And they wanted her to flip on Dominic. She should do it, should tell them everything. It was the smart move, the safe move. The only move that ended with her walking away from this intact. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Dominic crouched in front of her in that hotel bathroom, his hand steady on her chin, his voice calm as he told her to breathe. The way he'd looked at her in the warehouse before pulling the trigger. Not apologetic, not defensive, just honest. This is who I am. And she'd stayed anyway. Emily grabbed her laptop and opened her email. At the top of her inbox was a message from an address she didn't recognize sent 2 hours ago. No subject line, just a single sentence. Check your door. Emily's blood ran cold. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked to the front door. When she looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. But when she opened the door, there was a manila envelope on the floor. No markings, no return address. Emily picked it up and brought it inside, her hands trembling. She opened it carefully, half expecting something horrific, a threat, a photo, evidence of something she didn't want to see. Instead, it was a set of documents, financial records, wire transfers, shell companies, and at the center of it all, a name she recognized, Vanessa Hale. Emily spread the papers across her coffee table, her pulse racing. The records showed millions of dollars moving through offshore accounts, all tied back to Vanessa's investment firm. But buried in the fine print was something else. Payments to a federal informant. Regular, consistent payments dating back 3 years. Emily's stomach dropped. Vanessa was the leak. Not the man in the warehouse. Not some low-level operative. Vanessa Hale, the woman who'd warned Emily not to ask questions, who'd smiled at her across that table in Santa Monica like a snake sizing up its prey, had been feeding information to the FBI the entire time, which meant Dominic had killed the wrong person. Emily grabbed her phone and called him. It rang 4 times before he picked up. "What is it?" His voice was rough, like she'd woken him. "We need to talk, now." "Emily." "I'm serious, Dominic. I found something bad." There was a pause, then, "Where are you?" "My apartment." "Don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up. Emily paced the length of her living room, her mind racing. If Vanessa was the informant, then she knew everything, every meeting, every deal, every name. And she'd been passing it all to the FBI while smiling and shaking hands and pretending to be part of the team. But why send Emily the evidence? Why now? The answer hit her like a fist to the gut, because Vanessa wanted her to know, wanted her to panic, wanted her to make a move that would expose her. This wasn't just a leak, it was a setup. Emily was still staring at the documents when her door burst open. She spun around, heart in her throat, expecting FBI agents, or worse. But it was Dominic, with Marcus right behind him. Dominic's eyes went straight to the papers spread across the table. "Where did you get these?" he demanded. "Someone left them at my door." Dominic picked up the top sheet, scanning it quickly. His jaw tightened. "Vanessa." "She's been working with the feds for 3 years," Emily said, "which means that man in the warehouse was innocent, I know." Dominic's voice was flat, but there was something dangerous underneath it, something that made Emily's skin prickle. "You know? How long have you—" "2 hours. I got a call from one of my contacts in the bureau. They confirmed it." He set down the paper and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "This is why I told you not to get involved." "You think I wanted this?" Emily's voice rose. "You dragged me into this. You put me in those meetings, made me shake hands with these people, and you went along with it. Don't pretend you're some innocent victim, Emily. You knew what you were getting into. I knew you were dangerous. I didn't know you were careless." The words hung in the air like a slap. Dominic's expression went cold. "Get out, Marcus." Marcus hesitated, then walked out, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dominic took a step closer, and Emily forced herself not to back away. "Careless," he repeated, his voice low. "You think I'm careless. You killed the wrong person. I killed the person who was going to get us all arrested. The fact that there was another leak doesn't change that. It changes everything." Emily's hands were shaking. "That man, whoever he was, he died because you made a mistake. And now the FBI is circling. And Vanessa's out there with enough evidence to bury all of us. And you're acting like it's just another problem to solve. It is just another problem to solve. Someone died. People die all the time, Emily. That's the world we live in." Emily stared at him, her chest heaving. "I don't want to live in that world." "Then you should have walked away when I gave you the chance." "Maybe I still can." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Emily's throat tightened. She shouldn't say it, shouldn't even think it. But the words spilled out anyway. "The FBI called me. They want me to cooperate, to testify against you. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dominic didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at her with an expression that made her blood run cold. "And what did you tell them?" he asked quietly. "I told them I needed to think about it." "Wrong answer." "Excuse me?" Dominic took another step forward. "There's no thinking about it, Emily. You're either with me or you're against me. And if you're against me, what? You'll kill me too? Add me to the list? I'll make sure you regret it." Emily's breath caught. For the first time since she'd met him, she was genuinely afraid. Not of what he might do to her career or her reputation, of what he might do, period. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking. "Emily, I said get out." Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked to the door. But before he left, he looked back over his shoulder. "You've got 24 hours to decide whose side you're on. After that, the choice is out of your hands." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Emily sank onto the couch, her entire body trembling. She looked down at the documents still spread across the table, proof that everything she'd been part of was built on lies and blood and betrayal. And she had no idea who to trust anymore. Emily didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone, watching the hours tick by. She'd written and deleted a dozen messages to Dominic, to Rachel, to her mother, but every time she tried to put her thoughts into words, they fell apart. At 4 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Pier 45, 6 a.m. Come alone. V. Vanessa." Emily's first instinct was to delete it, to block the number and pretend she'd never seen it. But curiosity, or maybe desperation, won out. She grabbed her coat and keys and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. The pier was deserted when she arrived, just the sound of water lapping against the pylons and the distant groan of a cargo ship. The city was still asleep, the skyline dark except for a few scattered lights. Vanessa was waiting at the end of the pier, leaning against the railing with her back to the water. She looked exactly the same as she had in Los Angeles, sharp, polished, untouchable. Except now Emily knew what she really was. "You came," Vanessa said. "You knew I would." "Did I?" Vanessa smiled. "I wasn't sure. You're full of surprises, Ms. Vance." Emily stopped a few feet away, her hands jammed in her pockets. "Why did you send me those documents?" "Because I wanted you to know the truth. About Dominic, about me, about all of it." "You're working with the FBI." "I'm working for myself. The FBI just happens to be useful." Vanessa pushed off the railing and took a step closer. "Let me ask you something, Emily. Do you actually believe Dominic cares about you, that you're anything more than a pawn to him?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." "Good. That's honest." Vanessa's smile faded. "He's using you, the same way he's used everyone who's ever gotten close to him. And when you're no longer useful, he'll discard you, or worse." "Then why are you telling me this? What do you want?" Vanessa reached into her coat and pulled out a small recording device. She set it on the railing between them. "I want you to wear this, get Dominic talking, get him to admit what he's done, the murders, the money laundering, all of it. And then I want you to walk away with immunity and a clean slate." Emily stared at the device. It was small, sleek, professional. The kind of thing that could end someone's life with the press of a button. "And if I say no, then the FBI comes for you too. And trust me, Emily, you don't have the resources to fight them. Dominic does. You don't." Emily's hands were shaking. She wanted to scream, to tell Vanessa to go to hell. But the truth was, she was right. Emily didn't have a way out, not unless she made one. "I need time to think," Emily said. "You have until tonight. After that, the offer's off the table." Vanessa picked up the recording device and held it out. "Take it, just in case." Emily looked at the device for a long moment. Then, against every instinct screaming at her to run, she took it. Vanessa smiled. "Smart girl." She walked past Emily, her heels clicking against the wooden planks, and disappeared into the early morning fog. Emily stood alone on the pier, the recording device heavy in her hand, and watched the sun rise over the city. And for the first time in her life, she had absolutely no idea what to do next. By the time Emily got back to her apartment, it was almost 7 a.m. She was exhausted, wrung out, running on nothing but adrenaline and fear. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, and froze. Dominic was sitting on her couch. How did you... You're building security as a joke, he said calmly. We need to talk. Emily's hand tightened around the recording device in her pocket. I told you to leave, and I told you that you had 24 hours to decide. It's been 18. I wanted to check in. Emily closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. There's nothing to check in about. I haven't made a decision. Yes, you have. Dominic stood and walked toward her, his eyes locked on hers. You met with Vanessa this morning, at the pier. She gave you something. Emily's blood turned to ice. How? I've had people watching her since I found out she was the leak, which means I've been watching you too. He stopped a few feet away. So I'll ask you one more time. What did she give you? Emily's mind raced. She could lie, could say it was nothing, but Dominic would see through it in seconds. A recording device, she said finally. And what does she want you to do with it? Get you talking. Get you to confess. Dominic's expression didn't change. And are you going to? Emily pulled the device out of her pocket and held it up. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Her hand shaking, his eyes dark and unreadable. Then Emily threw the device across the room. It hit the wall and shattered into pieces. Does that answer your question? She asked. Dominic stared at the broken device. Then slowly, he smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile she'd seen before. Something real. Something that looked almost like relief. Why? He asked. Because I'm already in too deep to pretend I'm not. Emily's voice was steady now, even though her hands weren't. Because walking away doesn't mean I'm safe. It just means I'm alone, and because... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Because what? Emily met his eyes. Because I chose this. I chose you. And I'm not going to run just because it got hard. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Dominic closed the distance between them, his hand cupping the side of her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, he said quietly, or the stupidest. Probably both. He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, like he was making a point. And when they finally broke apart, Emily's heart was racing for entirely different reasons. What happens now? She whispered. Now we deal with Vanessa. Together. How? Dominic's smile turned cold. By giving her exactly what she wants. The plan was insane. Suicidal, even. But Emily was past the point of caring. Dominic explained it to her over the next hour. How they'd use Vanessa's own trap against her. How they'd feed her just enough information to make her think she'd won, and then pull the rug out from under her at the last possible second. It required perfect timing, absolute trust, and a willingness to bet everything on a single hand. Emily should have said no, should have walked away while she still could, but she didn't. That night she met Vanessa at a restaurant in Midtown, upscale, crowded, the kind of place where conversations got lost in the noise. Emily was wearing the new recording device Dominic had given her, tucked under her blouse, transmitting every word back to him in real time. Vanessa was already seated when Emily arrived, a glass of wine in front of her, looking pleased with herself. I'm glad you came, Vanessa said as Emily sat down. I was starting to think you'd lost your nerve. I'm here, aren't I? You are, which means you've made your choice. Vanessa leaned forward. Tell me everything, and don't leave anything out. Emily took a breath, and then she started talking. She told Vanessa about the warehouse, about the man Dominic had killed, about the offshore accounts and the shell companies, and every detail she could remember from the last 2 weeks. She spoke calmly, methodically, like she was reading from a script, because she was. Every word had been carefully crafted by Dominic to sound real enough to be believed but vague enough to be useless in court. And Vanessa ate it up, her smile growing wider with every sentence. This is perfect, Vanessa said when Emily finished. With this, we can take them down. All of them. And then what? Emily asked. I walk away and pretend none of this happened? Exactly. Emily looked down at her hands. I don't think I can do that. You don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Vanessa's smile faded. What are you saying? Emily met her eyes. I'm saying you're under arrest. The words had barely left her mouth when FBI agents swarmed the restaurant, at least a dozen of them, moving fast, guns drawn. Vanessa's face went white as they surrounded her table. Vanessa Hale, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and about 15 other charges I'm sure they'll explain on the way to the station, Agent Reeves said, snapping handcuffs onto Vanessa's wrists. Vanessa's eyes locked onto Emily, burning with fury. You bitch! You set me up! No, Emily said calmly. You set yourself up. I just gave them the evidence. Because while Emily had been feeding Vanessa false information, the recording device had been capturing every word Vanessa said, including her admission that she'd been manipulating federal investigations for her own gain, that she'd falsified evidence, that she'd let an innocent man die to protect her cover. All of it on tape, all of it admissible in court. Vanessa was dragged out of the restaurant, still screaming threats, while the other diners stared in shock. Emily sat there for another moment, her hand shaking, before Agent Reeves sat down across from her. That was impressive, Reeves said, and incredibly stupid. I've been hearing that a lot lately. Reeves smiled faintly. For what it's worth, your cooperation won't be forgotten. We'll make sure you're protected. And Dominic? Reeves's smile faded. That's a different conversation. One we'll be having very soon. She stood and walked away, leaving Emily alone at the table. Emily pulled out her phone and sent a single text to Dominic. It's done. The response came 30 seconds later. Meet me at the office, top floor, 1 hour. Emily stood, left cash on the table, and walked out into the night. She'd just burned the last bridge she had, and she had no idea what was waiting for her on the other side. The elevator to the 47th floor felt slower than usual. Emily watched the numbers climb, 38, 39, 40, each one another second closer to whatever was waiting for her at the top. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished doors, pale and hollow-eyed, wearing the same clothes she'd worn to meet Vanessa. She looked like someone who'd been awake for 3 days straight. She felt like someone who'd been awake for 3 years. The doors opened with the soft chime. The executive floor was dark except for the lights coming from Dominic's office at the end of the hall. Emily stepped out, her heels clicking against the marble, each step echoing in the silence. Marcus wasn't at his usual post. No one was. The entire floor felt abandoned, like everyone had been evacuated before a bomb went off. Maybe they had been. Dominic's office door was open. Emily paused in the doorway, her hand on the frame. He was standing by the window with his back to her, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of whiskey. The city sprawled beneath him, 1,000 lights glittering against the black. From up here, it looked peaceful, manageable, like something you could hold in the palm of your hand and control. But Emily knew better now. Come in, Dominic said without turning around. Close the door. Emily stepped inside and pushed the door shut. The click of the latch sounded final, like a cell door closing. Is it done? Dominic asked. Vanessa's in custody. The FBI has everything they need to prosecute her for obstruction and conspiracy. She won't be a problem anymore. Good. Dominic took a sip of whiskey. And what did you give them on me? Emily's throat tightened. Nothing that will stick. Everything I told Vanessa was either vague or unprovable. Agent Reeves knows that. She's not happy about it, but she knows. So we're clear. For now. Dominic finally turned to face her. He looked tired, genuinely tired, not just the surface exhaustion of too many late nights, but something deeper. Something that went all the way down to the bone. You took a hell of a risk tonight, he said. So did you, trusting me with your freedom. I didn't have much choice. Emily crossed her arms. You always have a choice. You told me that yourself. Dominic set down his glass and walked toward her, each step measured and deliberate. When he stopped, he was close enough that she could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. You're right, he said quietly. I did have a choice, and I chose to trust you, which is either the smartest thing I've ever done or the stupidest. We'll find out soon enough. We already did. You didn't run. You didn't fold. You looked the FBI in the eye and gave them just enough to keep them happy without burning me. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. You're a natural, Emily. Better than half the people who've worked for me for years. I don't want to work for you. Then what do you want? Emily met his eyes. I want to know what happens next. Because right now, I've got the FBI watching my every move, a woman who wants me dead sitting in a cell downtown, and a man who just admitted I'm complicit in things that could put me in prison for the rest of my life. So tell me, Dominic, what the hell happens next? Dominic's hand dropped from her face. He turned and walked back to his desk, picking up a folder she hadn't noticed before. He held it out to her. This happens next. Emily took the folder and opened it. Inside were airline tickets, 2 of them, first class departing tomorrow morning. Destination, Geneva. Along with the tickets were documents for a new bank account, a property deed for a villa in the Swiss countryside, and a passport with her photo but a different name. Her hands started to shake. "What is this?" she whispered. "An exit strategy. For both of us." Emily looked up at him, her heart pounding. "You're running." "I'm relocating. There's a difference." "Not to the FBI, there isn't." Dominic leaned against his desk, his arms crossed. "The walls are closing in, Emily. Vanessa's arrest bought us time, but not much. The feds have been building a case against me for years, and now they're moving into the endgame. I've got maybe a week before they try to bring me in, maybe less. So you're just going to disappear?" "I'm going to disappear, and I'm offering you the chance to come with me." Emily stared at the documents in her hands. A new name, a new life, a clean slate in a country that didn't extradite to the United States. It was everything she should want, everything she'd been fantasizing about since the moment she stepped off that plane from Los Angeles. So why did it feel like a trap? "What about my family?" she asked. "My friends? My entire life?" "You leave it behind, all of it. Just like that. Just like that." Dominic's voice softened. "I know what I'm asking, Emily. I know how much you'd be giving up. But if you stay here, the FBI will come for you eventually. They'll pressure you to testify, to flip, to give them everything you know. And when you can't, or won't, they'll charge you as an accomplice. You'll spend the next decade in court, bleeding money and reputation until there's nothing left. And if I go with you, then you get to start over. No more looking over your shoulder, no more wondering when the other shoe's going to drop." He paused. "And you won't be alone." Emily closed the folder and set it on the desk. "You're asking me to run away with you. I'm asking you to survive with me. It's not the same thing, isn't it?" Emily turned away from him, her mind racing. Everything he was saying made sense. The FBI wouldn't stop. They'd hound her, pressure her, make her life a living hell until she gave them what they wanted. And even if she didn't, the association alone would destroy her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for. But running felt like admitting defeat, like confirming everything Vanessa had said about her, that she was just a pawn, a disposable piece in someone else's game. "I need time to think," Emily said. "You have 12 hours. The flight leaves at 10 a.m. That's not enough time." "It's all the time we have." Emily spun around to face him, anger flaring in her chest. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to drop a bomb in my lap and then give me a deadline like I'm some employee you're firing. I'm not firing you. I'm trying to save your life. By asking me to abandon everything I've ever known, to become a fugitive? You're already a fugitive, Emily. You just haven't been caught yet." The words hit her like a slap. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was wrong, but she couldn't, because he wasn't wrong. She'd crossed lines she couldn't uncross, made choices she couldn't unmake. And now she was standing in the wreckage, trying to figure out how to live with it. "I can't do this," she whispered. Dominic closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip firm, but not painful, forcing her to look at him. "Yes, you can," he said, his voice low and intense. "You're the strongest person I know, Emily. Stronger than you give yourself credit for. You've survived things that would have broken most people. And you'll survive this too." "I don't want to just survive, I want to live." "Then come with me, and we'll figure out how to do both." Emily stared into his eyes, searching for something, certainty, reassurance, proof that this wasn't just another manipulation. But all she saw was the same desperation she felt clawing at her own chest. "I need to go," she said, pulling away from him. "Emily, I said I need to go." She grabbed her bag and walked to the door, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Behind her, she heard Dominic take a step forward, then stop. "The offer stands until 10 a.m., he said quietly. "After that, you're on your own." Emily didn't respond. She just opened the door and walked out, leaving him alone in that vast, empty office. Emily didn't go home. She couldn't. The walls of her apartment felt like they were closing in, suffocating her with memories and choices and all the things she couldn't change. Instead, she walked, block after block, her feet moving on autopilot while her mind spun in circles. She ended up in Central Park just after midnight. The pathways were mostly empty, just a few joggers and late-night wanderers, their faces pale under the streetlights. Emily found a bench near the lake and sat down, pulling her coat tighter against the cold. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Where are you? You've been MIA for days and I'm starting to freak out. Call me." Emily stared at the message for a long time. She could call. Could tell Rachel everything. About Dominic, about Los Angeles, about the choice she was facing right now. Rachel would tell her to stay, to fight, to not let some man dictate her entire future. And Rachel would be right. But Rachel didn't know what Emily had seen. Didn't know about the warehouse or the federal investigation or the fact that staying meant spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for the inevitable knock on the door. Emily typed out a response. "I'm okay. Just dealing with some work stuff. I'll call you soon. Promise." It was a lie, but it was easier than the truth. Another buzz. This one from a blocked number. "You made the right choice tonight, but don't get comfortable. We're not done with Kane, and we're not done with you. Reeves." Emily's stomach twisted. She deleted the message and turned off her phone. The park was quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic and the gentle lap of water against the shore. Emily closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her life would look like in 24 hours. Would she be on a plane to Geneva, leaving everything behind? Or would she be in her apartment, waiting for the FBI to come knocking, ready to fight a battle she probably couldn't win? Neither option felt right, but one of them felt survivable. At 6 a.m., Emily was back at her apartment, standing in the middle of her living room, staring at the suitcase open on her bed. She'd been packing for the last hour. Clothes, documents, a few photos she couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything else would stay. The furniture, the books, the life she'd built over the last decade. All of it expendable. Her hands were shaking as she zipped up the suitcase. This was insane. She was actually doing this. Actually running away like some character in a movie, leaving everything behind for a man she barely knew and a future that was nothing but question marks. But the alternative was worse. She checked her watch. 6:47 a.m. The car Dominic had arranged would be here in 13 minutes. She had just enough time to... The knock on the door made her jump. Emily froze, her heart hammering. It was too early for the car. Too early for anyone except... She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Agent Reeves was standing in the hallway, flanked by 2 other agents. All of them looked grim. Emily's blood turned to ice. She opened the door slowly, keeping the chain on. "Agent Reeves, it's 6 in the morning. I know. I'm sorry about the hour, but this couldn't wait." Reeves held up a folded piece of paper. "I have a warrant for your arrest, Ms. Vance." The world tilted. "What?" Emily's voice came out as a whisper. "We have evidence linking you to multiple criminal activities, including conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and aiding and abetting a known criminal enterprise. You need to come with us. Now." Emily's mind went blank. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She'd given them Vanessa. She'd cooperated. She'd done everything they'd asked. "I want a lawyer," she managed to say. "You'll get one. But right now you need to open this door." Emily's hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the chain. She opened the door fully, and the agents moved in immediately, professional and efficient. One of them guided her hands behind her back, while another read her rights in a monotone voice that sounded like it was coming from underwater. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Emily barely heard it. All she could think about was the suitcase on her bed, the plane ticket in her bag, and the fact that she'd waited too long. She'd missed her window. They led her out of the apartment in handcuffs, past neighbors who stared from their doorways, down to a waiting car on the street. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it looked like the end of the world. The interrogation room was exactly like every cop show had ever depicted. Gray walls, metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and a mirror that was obviously one-way glass. Emily sat with her hands cuffed to the table, still wearing the clothes she'd packed for Geneva, watching the clock on the wall tick past 8 a.m. She'd been here for over an hour, and no one had said a word to her except to offer water, which she'd refused. The door finally opened. Agent Reeves walked in, carrying a thick file folder and a cup of coffee. She set both on the table and sat down across from Emily. "Let's talk," Reeves said. "I want my lawyer." "Your lawyer's on the way, but we can still talk, off the record." Emily laughed bitterly. "Nothing's off the record with you people." "Fair enough." Reeves opened the folder and pulled out a series of photographs. She spread them across the table, each one showing Emily in Los Angeles, entering meetings, leaving hotels, standing on the pier with Vanessa. "You were busy in California," Reeves said. Emily didn't respond. "Here's what we know. Dominic Kane has been running a criminal enterprise for over a decade. Money laundering, extortion, contract killings, the works. And for the last 3 weeks, you've been helping him expand into new territory." Reeves tapped one of the photos. "That's you meeting with Richard Chen, a known associate of the Sinaloa cartel. That's you with Gerald Moss, who's currently under investigation for securities fraud. And that," she tapped another photo, "is you leaving a warehouse where we found trace evidence of a homicide." Emily's throat tightened. "I didn't kill anyone?" "No, but you were there when it happened, which makes you an accessory." "I was brought there against my will. I didn't know what was going to happen." "That's your story. But the evidence tells a different one." Reeves leaned forward. "Here's the thing, Emily. I actually believe you. I think you got in over your head. I think Dominic Kane manipulated you, used you, and put you in situations you never should have been in. But belief doesn't matter. Evidence matters. And right now, the evidence says you're complicit." Emily's hands were shaking. "So what do you want from me?" "I want Dominic Kane. I want testimony. I want details. I want everything you know about his operation. And in exchange, I can make most of this go away. You'll do some time, probably a year or two, but it'll be minimum security. You'll survive." "And if I say no?" Reeves's expression hardened. "Then you're looking at 20 years, maybe more. And Kane walks away clean while you rot in a cell." Emily stared at the photos spread across the table. Her entire life, reduced to surveillance images and criminal allegations. She thought about the plane ticket in her bag, the villa in Switzerland, the new name waiting for her, all of it worthless now. "I need to think," Emily said. "You've got 30 minutes. After that, the offer expires." Reeves stood and walked out, leaving Emily alone with the photos and the ticking clock. 28 minutes later, the door opened again. But it wasn't Reeves who walked in. It was Dominic's lawyer, a woman in her 50s named Catherine Marsh, with steel gray hair and a reputation for destroying federal cases before they even made it to trial. "Don't say another word," Catherine said, sitting down and opening her briefcase. "Not to them, not to me, not to anyone until I've reviewed the evidence." Emily stared at her. "How did you—" "Mr. Kane called me the moment you were arrested. He's very concerned about your welfare." "He should be concerned about his own welfare." Catherine smiled thinly. "He is, which is why he's currently in the air, heading somewhere without extradition. He told me to tell you that the offer still stands, if you can find a way out of here." Emily's chest tightened. "He left. He had to, but he made arrangements for your defense. Full legal team, unlimited resources, the best experts money can buy. You're not alone in this." "Yes, I am." Catherine's expression softened just slightly. "Listen to me very carefully, Emily. The evidence against you is circumstantial at best. They have photos, they have speculation, but they don't have anything concrete. No recordings, no financial records, no witnesses who can definitively place you at the scene of a crime. Which means this is a fishing expedition. They're hoping you'll panic and give them what they need. So what do I do?" "You don't say a word. You let me handle this, and in 48 hours, you'll walk out of here." Emily wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that someone could actually fix this nightmare. But she'd seen too much, knew too much to trust easy promises. "What if they have more than you think?" Emily asked. "Then we deal with it, but we deal with it strategically, not emotionally." Catherine pulled out a legal pad and a pen. "Now, tell me everything that happened from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." Emily talked for 2 hours. She told Catherine everything: the voice note, the promotion, Los Angeles, the warehouse, Vanessa, all of it. And with every word, she felt the weight of it settling deeper into her bones. When she finished, Catherine sat back and studied her notes. "This is manageable," she said finally. "Manageable? They have me at a murder scene. They have you near a location where they suspect a crime occurred. That's very different." Catherine tapped her pen against the pad. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to challenge every piece of evidence they have. We're going to demand to see their forensics, their witnesses, their entire case. And when they can't produce anything solid, we're going to move for dismissal. And if they can produce something solid, then we negotiate. But we do it from a position of strength, not desperation." Catherine leaned forward. "You need to trust me, Emily. I've done this 100 times, and I'm very, very good at my job." Emily nodded slowly. She didn't have much choice. Catherine packed up her briefcase and stood. "I'm going to go talk to the prosecutor. Don't say anything to anyone until I get back. Understood?" "Understood." Catherine knocked on the door, and a guard let her out. Emily was alone again, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the clock on the wall showing 11:34 a.m. She'd missed the flight. Dominic was gone, and she was sitting in a federal holding cell, waiting to see if her life was about to fall apart completely. 3 hours later, Catherine returned, and she was smiling. "They're letting you go," she said. Emily's heart skipped. "What?" "They don't have enough to charge you. The photos are circumstantial, the warehouse evidence is inconclusive, and without testimony from you or Vanessa, who's refusing to cooperate, they've got nothing. You're free to leave." Emily stood on shaking legs. "Just like that?" "Just like that, but Emily..." Catherine's smile faded. "This isn't over. They're going to keep investigating. They're going to keep watching you. And if they find anything at all, they'll bring you back in. So you need to be very, very careful about what you do next." Emily nodded numbly. "I will." "Good. There's a car waiting for you outside. It'll take you wherever you want to go." Emily walked out of the interrogation room, through the sterile hallways of the federal building, past the agents who'd arrested her this morning. None of them looked at her. She might as well have been invisible. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The car Catherine had mentioned was parked at the curb, a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver's window rolled down. Marcus was behind the wheel. "Get in," he said. Emily hesitated. "Where's Dominic?" "Somewhere safe. He sent me to get you." "He left me." "He protected you. There's a difference." Marcus jerked his head toward the passenger seat. "You coming or not?" Emily looked back at the federal building, at the life she'd almost lost, at the choice that had been made for her when she'd hesitated too long. Then she got in the car. Marcus pulled into traffic, heading east toward the bridges. They drove in silence for 10 minutes before Emily finally spoke. "Where are we going?" "Airport, private terminal. There's a plane waiting." "For what?" Marcus glanced at her. "For you to decide if you're in or out. Last chance, Emily. After this, there's no turning back." Emily stared out the window at the city sliding past, the buildings, the people, the life she'd built and was about to abandon. She thought about her mother, her friends, the career she'd worked so hard for, all of it about to disappear into the rearview mirror. But she also thought about the federal holding cell, about Agent Reeves's face when she'd laid out the evidence, about the 20 years hanging over her head like a guillotine blade. And she thought about Dominic, waiting somewhere on the other side of the world, offering her a chance at something she couldn't even name. "I'm in," she said quietly. Marcus nodded and pressed harder on the gas. The city blurred past, faster and faster, until Emily couldn't tell where one street ended and another began. And then they crossed the bridge, and Manhattan disappeared behind them, swallowed by the gathering dark. The private terminal was small and discreet, tucked away from the main airport, the kind of place where questions weren't asked and names weren't recorded. Marcus led Emily across the tarmac to a sleek Gulfstream, its engines already running. At the top of the stairs, a flight attendant greeted her with a professional smile. "Ms. Vance, welcome aboard." Emily climbed the stairs on shaking legs and stepped into the cabin. It was beautiful, leather seats, polished wood, soft lighting, like something out of a magazine. And sitting in one of the seats, looking exhausted but alive, was Dominic. He stood when he saw her, his expression unreadable. You came. I didn't have much choice. You always have a choice. Emily walked toward him, her heart pounding. You left me. I was coming back. When? After I'd rotted in a cell for 20 years? I was never going to let that happen. Dominic closed the distance between them, his voice low and intense. I had Catherine on standby before they even knocked on your door. I had a plan to get you out, no matter what it took. You were never alone, Emily. Not for a second. Emily's eyes burned. You should have told me. I couldn't risk it. If the feds thought you knew I was running, they'd have locked you up and thrown away the key. He reached up and cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I'm sorry. For all of it. But I'm not sorry you're here. Emily closed her eyes and leaned into his touch, too tired to fight anymore. What happens now? She whispered. Now we disappear. Together. The flight attendant appeared in the doorway. We're cleared for takeoff, Mr. Kane. Dominic looked at Emily, waiting for her answer. She took a shaking breath, and then she nodded. Let's go. Dominic led her to a seat and helped her with the belt. The plane started to taxi, the engines roaring to life, and Emily watched through the window as New York grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a cluster of lights against the black. And then it was gone. Dominic reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady. You okay? He asked. Emily looked at him, at this man who'd turned her entire life upside down, who'd dragged her into a world of blood and secrets and impossible choices, this man who'd saved her and destroyed her in equal measure. No, she said honestly. But I will be. Dominic smiled, small and sad and achingly real. Yeah, he said, you will. The plane climbed higher, breaking through the clouds, and Emily closed her eyes and let herself breathe for the first time in weeks. She'd burned every bridge, cut every tie, left everything behind. But she was alive. And for now, that was enough. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Emily woke to find Dominic standing by the window, staring out at the darkness. She unbuckled her seatbelt and walked over to him. Can't sleep? She asked. Never could. Not on planes. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars. I need you to understand something, Dominic said quietly. What we're walking into, it's not going to be easy. There are people who'll want me dead. People who'll use you to get to me. And there won't be any going back. I know. Do you? He turned to face her, his expression serious. Because once we land, Emily Vance stops existing. You'll have a new name, a new life, a new everything. And the person you used to be? She's gone. Emily thought about that. About the girl who'd sent that voice note, who'd walked into Dominic's office expecting to be fired, who'd thought the worst thing that could happen was professional humiliation. That girl felt like someone from another lifetime. Good, Emily said. I didn't like her much anyway. Dominic's lips quirked into a small smile. Who do you want to be instead? Emily considered the question. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than fear or exhaustion or desperation. She felt possibility. I don't know yet, she said, but I'm going to figure it out. Dominic reached for her hand and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. Emily rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. We're going to be okay, he murmured into her hair. You don't know that. No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. Emily closed her eyes and let herself believe it too, just for a moment. Behind them, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day, a new beginning. And somewhere ahead, in a country she'd never been to, a life she couldn't yet imagine was waiting. All she had to do was reach for it. The plane flew on, carrying them toward an uncertain future, leaving the past burning in its wake. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Emily Vance, whoever she was about to become, smiled. Geneva greeted them with rain. It came down in sheets, drumming against the roof of the car that picked them up from the private airfield, turning the world beyond the windows into a blur of gray and silver. Emily pressed her forehead against the cold glass and watched Switzerland slide past. Mountains in the distance, sprawling estates hidden behind stone walls, roads that curved and climbed through landscapes that looked like they'd been painted by someone who'd never seen chaos. It was beautiful, peaceful. Everything New York wasn't, and it felt like a tomb. Dominic sat beside her in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on something she couldn't see. He'd barely spoken since they landed, just nodded to the driver and settled into the back seat like a man preparing for battle. Marcus was in the front, as always, his presence a constant reminder that safety was an illusion and peace was temporary. The villa was exactly what the documents had promised. Remote, elegant, surrounded by acres of forest and meadow. It sat on a hillside overlooking a lake so still it looked like glass. The kind of place where people came to disappear, where the world forgot you existed. Emily stepped out of the car into the rain and stared up at the house. 2 stories, cream-colored stone, dark shutters, a garden that had grown wild in whoever's absence. It looked abandoned. Or maybe just waiting. "This is it?" she asked. Dominic came to stand beside her, his hands in his pockets. "This is it. No neighbors for 3 miles, no cameras, no paper trail. As far as the world is concerned, this place doesn't exist. Sounds lonely. It's safe. That's all that matters." Marcus carried their bags inside while Dominic gave Emily a brief tour. Living room with a fireplace big enough to stand in, kitchen with windows overlooking the valley, bedrooms upstairs with furniture covered in white sheets. Everything smelled like dust and time and abandonment. "How long have you owned this place?" Emily asked. 8 years. I bought it the first time things got complicated in New York. Figured I'd need an exit strategy eventually. Dominic pulled the sheet off a leather couch, dust motes dancing in the air. "I just didn't think I'd be using it this soon." Emily walked to the window and looked out at the rain. "Do you regret it? Running?" "No, I regret that you had to run with me. I made that choice." "You made it because I didn't give you a better option." Emily turned to face him. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Taking responsibility for my decisions. I'm not some helpless victim you manipulated. I knew what I was getting into. Maybe not at first, but by the end, I knew. And I stayed anyway." Dominic studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Why? It was the question Emily had been asking herself for the last 12 hours. Why had she gotten in that car? Why had she boarded the plane? Why had she burned her entire life to the ground for a man she barely knew? "Because I was tired of being afraid," she said finally, "and because I thought maybe, just maybe, there was something worth saving on the other side of all this." And is there? Emily looked around the empty room, at the life they'd have to build from nothing, at the man standing in front of her with shadows in his eyes and blood on his hands. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'm going to find out." The first 3 days were strange, too quiet, too slow. Emily spent most of her time wandering the villa, unpacking the few belongings they'd brought, staring out windows at a landscape that felt like it belonged in a postcard. Dominic was gone more often than not. Meetings, he said, with people who could help them establish new identities, new accounts, new lives. He never gave details. Emily stopped asking. Marcus stayed close, always watching, always waiting for the threat that hadn't arrived yet. Emily found his presence oddly comforting. At least someone was still operating on the assumption that the world was dangerous. On the 4th night, Emily couldn't sleep. She walked downstairs in bare feet and an oversized sweater, found a bottle of wine in the kitchen, and took it out to the terrace. The rain had stopped, leaving everything wet and clean and smelling like earth. The stars were out, more than she'd ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds. She was on her 2nd glass when Dominic appeared in the doorway. "Can't sleep either," he asked. "Too quiet. I'm used to sirens and garbage trucks and people yelling at 3 a.m. Dominic sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You'll get used to it." "Will I? Or will I just go crazy in the silence?" "Little bit of both, probably." Emily laughed despite herself. "That's reassuring." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sharing the wine, watching the stars. Emily felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite peace, but close enough that it might pass for it in the dark. "I need to tell you something," Dominic said finally. Emily's stomach tightened. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. It's just—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Before all this, before you, I never thought I'd get out. I built this empire thinking I'd die in it, that it would consume me eventually, the way it consumes everyone who stays too long, and I was okay with that. It felt inevitable. And now? Now I'm sitting on a terrace in Switzerland with a woman I dragged into hell, and all I can think about is that maybe, just maybe, I got out in time. Emily looked at him, really looked at him. The exhaustion carved into his face, the tension that never quite left his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked every shadow like he was waiting for something to emerge from the dark. "You're not out yet," she said quietly. "Neither of us are." "I know, but we're closer than we've ever been." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. They stayed like that until the stars started to fade, and the sky turned gray with the promise of dawn. On the 8th day, everything changed. Emily was in the garden, attempting to salvage what was left of the overgrown roses, when Marcus appeared at the edge of the terrace. His expression was grim. "We have a problem," he said. Emily stood, her heart already racing. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that requires you to get inside. Now." She didn't argue, just dropped the pruning shears and followed him into the house. Dominic was in the living room, on the phone, his voice clipped and furious. "I don't care how they found it. I care that you fix it. You have 6 hours. He hung up and threw the phone onto the couch. "What happened?" Emily asked. Dominic turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something close to panic in his eyes. "Someone leaked our location. We've got maybe 12 hours before people start showing up who aren't friendly." Emily's blood went cold. "Who leaked it?" "We don't know yet, but it doesn't matter. We need to move." "Move where?" "There's a safe house in the mountains, 2 hours north. We leave in 20 minutes. Emily's mind was spinning. "I thought this place was untraceable." "So did I." "Which means someone on the inside talked." Dominic grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip firm. "Pack light, essentials only, and stay with Marcus until we're ready to go." He disappeared upstairs, already moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Emily stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what was happening, before Marcus's voice cut through the fog. "Emily, move!" She moved. 20 minutes later, they were in the car, speeding through narrow mountain roads as the sun set behind them. Emily sat in the back with a duffel bag at her feet, watching the villa disappear in the side mirror. She'd barely unpacked, barely started to believe they might actually be safe, and now they were running again. "How did they find us?" she asked. Dominic didn't take his eyes off the road. "I have a few theories, none of them good. Care to share?" "Not until I'm sure." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "You can't keep shutting me out. If someone betrayed us, I have a right to know who." "You'll know when I know." "That's not good enough." Dominic's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Marcus, in the passenger seat, shifted slightly, a warning. Emily bit back the rest of her argument and turned to stare out the window. The safe house turned out to be less of a house and more of a reinforced bunker built into the side of a mountain. Concrete walls, steel doors, windows barely big enough to see through. It looked like something designed to survive a war. Maybe it was. Inside was sparse. A few pieces of furniture, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that looked like it had been installed in the 70s. There were 2 bedrooms, both small and cold. Emily dropped her bag in one and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. This was supposed to be over. They were supposed to be safe. A knock on the door. Dominic stepped inside, closing it behind him. "I know you're angry," he said. "I'm not angry. I'm terrified." Dominic sat down beside her, close enough that their knees touched. "I'm going to find out who did this, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. And if you can't, then we keep running, for as long as it takes." Emily looked at him, this man who'd promised her safety and delivered chaos, who'd offered her a new life and dragged her into a nightmare. She should hate him, should blame him for everything, but all she felt was tired. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, "running, hiding, waiting for the next disaster. I can't live like this." Dominic's expression softened. "I know, and I'm sorry, but right now it's the only option we have." "Then maybe I need to find a different option." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Dominic stood slowly. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll give you money, documents, everything you need to disappear on your own. But Emily," he paused, his voice rough. "If you leave, you're on your own. I can't protect you from a distance." Emily met his eyes. "Maybe I don't need you to protect me anymore." Something flickered across Dominic's face. Hurt, maybe, or acceptance. He nodded once and walked to the door. The offer stands. Think about it. He left her alone in the cold room, and Emily buried her face in her hands. She didn't sleep that night, just lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside and the distant creak of the bunker settling into the mountain. Around 3 a.m., she heard voices, low, urgent, coming from the other room. She got up and pressed her ear to the door. Don't care what it takes. Find them. All of them. Dominic's voice, sharp and furious. We're trying, but they're covering their tracks. Marcus, calm as ever. Then uncover them. I want names by morning. Emily pulled away from the door and sat on the edge of the bed. She thought about the offer Dominic had made. Money, documents, freedom. She could disappear. Start over somewhere far away from all of this. But the truth was, she didn't know how to disappear, didn't know how to build a life from nothing. She'd spent her entire adulthood climbing a ladder that had been yanked out from under her, and now she was free-falling with no idea where, or if, she'd land. The door opened. Marcus stood in the doorway, backlit by the dim light from the hallway. You should come see this, he said. Emily followed him into the main room. Dominic was standing in front of a laptop, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. When he saw Emily, he turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a series of bank transactions, millions of dollars moving through offshore accounts, all traced back to a single source. Gerald Moss. Emily's breath caught. Gerald? He's the one who leaked our location? Not just our location, everything. He's been feeding information to a rival syndicate for the last 6 months. They're the ones who want me dead. Dominic's voice was flat, controlled, but Emily could hear the fury underneath. He sold us out. Why? Money, power. Does it matter? Dominic closed the laptop. What matters is that he's still out there, and as long as he is, we're not safe. Emily's mind was racing. She'd met Gerald in Los Angeles, had shaken his hand, smiled at his compliments, trusted him because Dominic had trusted him. And he'd been planning to kill them the entire time. What are you going to do? She asked. Dominic looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. I'm going to end this. Tonight. How? Gerald's in Zurich, 3 hours from here. I'm going to meet him, and I'm going to make sure he doesn't get the chance to sell anyone else out. Emily's stomach dropped. You're going to kill him? Yes. The word was simple, final, without hesitation. Emily thought about the warehouse in Los Angeles, about the man tied to the chair, the crack of the gunshot, the way her entire world had tilted on its axis. She'd told herself she could live with it, that survival justified the cost. But could she live with this? With watching Dominic walk out the door knowing he was going to take another life? Let me come with you, she said. Dominic's expression hardened. No. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you, I'm coming. Emily, you said I was part of this, that I'd made my choice. Well, this is me making another one. I'm not sitting here waiting to see if you come back. I'm coming with you. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Marcus, who shrugged. She's stubborn, Marcus said. You're not going to change her mind. Dominic turned back to Emily. If you come, you follow my lead. No arguments, no hesitation. Understood? Understood. And if things go wrong, they won't. Dominic's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. You're learning. They left at 4 a.m., driving through mountain roads still slick with rain. Emily sat in the back, her heart pounding, her hands clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. She didn't know what she was about to walk into, didn't know if she'd survive it, but she knew she couldn't sit in that bunker and wait anymore. Zurich appeared out of the darkness like a ghost, clean, orderly, glittering with wealth. They parked in an underground garage beneath a high-rise, and Dominic led them to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. Gerald owns the top 3 floors, Dominic said as the elevator climbed. He thinks he's untouchable up here. And is he? We're about to find out. The elevator opened into a penthouse that made Emily's breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Modern furniture that probably cost more than her old apartment. Art on the walls that looked like it belonged in a museum. And standing in the center of it all, holding a glass of scotch, was Gerald Moss. He smiled when he saw them. Dominic, I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Dominic stepped out of the elevator, Marcus at his side. Emily stayed behind them, her pulse racing. You sold us out, Dominic said, his voice calm. I made a business decision. Nothing personal. Gerald took a sip of scotch. You're a sinking ship, Kane. I just made sure I wasn't on it when it went down. And how much did they pay you? Enough to retire comfortably, more than you ever would have offered. Dominic took a step closer. You know I can't let you walk away from this. Gerald's smile widened. I know, which is why I've taken precautions. He snapped his fingers, and 3 men emerged from the shadows, armed, professional, moving with the kind of precision that said they'd done this before. They positioned themselves between Gerald and Dominic, guns raised. Emily's heart stopped. Marcus moved first, his gun out in a heartbeat, but the other men were faster. Shots rang out, deafening in the confined space, and Marcus went down, blood blooming across his shoulder. Dominic lunged forward, but one of the men hit him with the butt of a gun, and he dropped to his knees. Emily stood frozen, her breath coming in short gasps, her mind screaming at her to move, to do something, but her body wouldn't obey. Gerald walked over to Dominic, still holding his scotch, and crouched down so they were eye level. You should have stayed in New York, Gerald said. Should have taken your chances with the feds. At least then you'd have lived a few more years. Dominic's lip was bleeding, but he smiled, cold and sharp. You think you've won. I know I have. Then you're stupider than I thought. Gerald frowned. What? The lights went out. For 3 seconds, the penthouse was plunged into total darkness. Emily heard shouting, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor, a gunshot that went wide. And then the lights came back on. Marcus was standing, his good arm holding a gun to the head of one of Gerald's men. The other 2 were on the ground, disarmed, and Dominic was on his feet, his own gun pressed against Gerald's temple. Precautions, Dominic said quietly. I took them too. Gerald's face went white. You're going to call off your syndicate, Dominic continued. You're going to tell them the deal's off, that you made a mistake, that I'm not worth the trouble. And then you're going to disappear permanently. And if I refuse? Dominic's finger tightened on the trigger. Then I'll make sure you never get the chance. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Gerald laughed, a broken, desperate sound. You can't do it. You need me alive to call them off. I don't need you, I just need your phone. Dominic pulled the phone from Gerald's pocket and tossed it to Emily. Call the last number. Put it on speaker. Emily's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it, but she managed to unlock the screen and dial. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. Gerald, tell me you have good news. Dominic pressed the gun harder against Gerald's head. Tell him. Gerald's voice was tight, strained. It's off. Kane's not worth it. Call off your people. What? Gerald, we had a deal. The deal's off. Do it. Now. There was a long pause, then, fine, but you're going to regret this. The line went dead. Dominic pulled the gun away and stepped back. Get out. And if I ever see you again, I won't hesitate. Gerald stumbled to his feet, his face pale, his hands shaking. He looked at Emily, then at Marcus, then back at Dominic. You're making a mistake, he said. Probably, but it's mine to make. Gerald walked to the elevator, his men following, all of them battered and humiliated. The doors closed, and they were gone. Emily let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her entire body was shaking, adrenaline crashing through her like a wave. Dominic turned to Marcus, who was leaning against the wall, blood still seeping from his shoulder. You good? Dominic asked. I'll live. Good. Let's get out of here. They made it back to the bunker just as the sun was rising. Marcus disappeared into the bathroom to patch himself up, leaving Emily and Dominic alone in the main room. Emily sank onto the couch, her legs giving out. That was insane. That was necessary. You could have killed him. I wanted to, but you were right. I don't need more blood on my hands. Dominic sat down beside her, wincing slightly. Besides, letting him live sends a message that I'm not someone you cross lightly. Emily looked at him. This man who'd just held a gun to someone's head, who'd orchestrated a takedown in the middle of a penthouse, who'd walked away from it all like it was just another Tuesday. Who are you? She asked. Dominic smiled faintly. I'm still figuring that out. They sat in silence for a while, the adrenaline slowly fading, leaving behind exhaustion and the strange clarity that came after surviving something you shouldn't have. I'm not leaving, Emily said finally. Dominic looked at her. What? You offered to let me go, to give me money and documents and a fresh start. I thought about it, really thought about it, and I realized I don't want a fresh start. I want to finish what we started, together. Emily, I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you. I'm staying. And we're going to build something here, something that's ours. Not an empire, not a criminal enterprise. Just a life. A real one. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Emily let herself sink into the embrace. She was tired, scared, still processing everything that had happened in the last month. But she was alive, and she was exactly where she wanted to be. 6 months later, Emily stood on the terrace of the villa, watching the sun set over the lake. The garden was thriving now, roses blooming in shades of red and pink, lavender swaying in the breeze, tomatoes ripening on the vine. She'd spent the last few weeks learning how to cultivate life instead of just surviving it. It was harder than she'd expected, but also more rewarding. Behind her, she heard the door open. Dominic stepped out, carrying 2 glasses of wine, and handed one to her. You've been out here for an hour, he said. I like it out here. It's peaceful. You say that like it's a bad thing. Emily smiled. I'm still getting used to peace. It feels fragile. It is fragile, but that doesn't make it less real. They stood side by side, watching the light fade, the sky turning from gold to pink to deep purple. In the distance, Emily could hear the faint sound of a church bell ringing, marking the end of another day. Do you ever regret it? She asked, leaving everything behind. Dominic considered the question. Sometimes, but then I look at what I have now and I realize I didn't lose everything. I just traded one life for another, a better one. Even with all the chaos? Especially with all the chaos. Chaos means we're still fighting, still alive, still trying. Emily took a sip of wine and let the words settle. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, the one who'd made a stupid mistake and sent a voice note to the wrong channel. That girl had been terrified of failure, desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice everything for a career that had never really been hers. That girl was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd seen the worst of the world and survived it, someone who'd made impossible choices and lived with the consequences, someone who'd chosen love over safety and found that maybe, just maybe, the two weren't as mutually exclusive as she'd thought. I got a call today, Dominic said. From Catherine. Emily looked at him. And? The feds closed the investigation, officially. They don't have enough evidence to pursue charges, and with Vanessa discredited, they've moved on to bigger targets. Emily's breath caught. We're clear? We're clear. She should have felt relief. Should have felt joy. But all she felt was a strange sense of closure, like a door closing on a chapter she'd never be able to revisit. Does that mean we can go back? She asked. We could. But do you want to? Emily looked out at the lake, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the life they'd built in this quiet corner of the world. She thought about New York, the noise, the chaos, the endless grind. She thought about her old apartment, her old job, her old self. And she realized she didn't miss any of it. No, she said. I don't want to go back. I want to stay here, with you. Dominic smiled, a real smile, the kind she'd only seen a handful of times. Good, because I wasn't planning on leaving. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and Emily leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, the steady rise and fall of his breath. They stayed like that until the stars came out, scattered across the sky like promises. That night, Emily couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't fear keeping her awake. It was something else. Something quieter. She slipped out of bed and walked downstairs, found Dominic in the kitchen making tea. Can't sleep? He asked. Old habits. He poured her a cup and they sat at the table, the house silent around them. I need to ask you something, Emily said, and I need you to be honest. Always. Do you think we'll ever really be safe? Or are we just pretending until the next disaster hits? Dominic set down his cup and looked at her. I think safety is a lie we tell ourselves to get through the day. But I also think if we're careful, if we're smart, if we watch each other's backs, we can build something close enough to safety that it doesn't matter. That's not very reassuring. It's the truth. And I think you've earned the truth. Emily smiled despite herself. When did you get so philosophical? When I started having something to lose. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I don't know what the future holds, Dominic said quietly. I don't know if we'll have 10 years or 10 days, but I know that whatever time we have, I want to spend it with you, building something, fighting for something, being someone better than I was. Emily's eyes burned. You're already better. So are you. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, the world outside dark and quiet. And Emily realized this was it. This was the life she'd chosen. Not perfect, not safe, but real, honest. Hers. And that was enough. 1 year later, Emily stood in the garden again, but this time she wasn't alone. A small group had gathered, friends they'd made in the village, people who knew them as quiet expats who kept to themselves but always had a kind word and a helping hand. No one asked questions. No one dug too deep. It was exactly what they needed. Dominic was inside preparing dinner, and Emily could hear him laughing at something Marcus had said. Marcus, who'd stayed with them, who'd become less of a bodyguard and more of a brother, who'd found his own kind of peace in the silence of the mountains. Rachel had visited last month, a surprise trip that had ended with tears and apologies and a promise to stay in touch. She didn't ask what had happened, didn't need to. She just looked at Emily, saw the strength in her eyes, and hugged her tight. You're different, Rachel had said. I know. But you're happy. And Emily had realized with a start that it was true. She was happy. Not in the frantic, desperate way she'd been in New York, chasing promotions and approval, but in a quiet, steady way that felt like breathing. Now, standing in the garden with the sun warm on her face and the sound of laughter drifting from the house, Emily closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The weight of everything she'd survived, the cost of everything she'd lost, the value of everything she'd gained. She thought about the voice note that had started it all, the careless moment that had set her life on fire. And she realized she wasn't sorry. Not anymore. Because that mistake had led her here. To this place, to this person, to this life, and it was a life worth living. Emily! Dominic's voice called from the house. Dinner's ready. She smiled and walked back inside, the garden blooming behind her, the future stretching ahead, uncertain and dangerous and impossibly beautiful. And for the first time in her life, Emily Vance, or whoever she'd become, wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready. Late that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Emily found Dominic on the terrace again. He was leaning against the railing, staring out at the stars, a familiar glass of whiskey in his hand. She walked up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. What are you thinking about? She asked. Everything. Nothing. He turned in her arms so they were face to face. Mostly about how I got lucky. Lucky? You call this lucky? I call surviving lucky. I call finding you lucky. I call getting a second chance at a life I didn't think I deserved. Yeah, I call that pretty damn lucky. Emily reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines that hadn't been there a year ago. The weight of leadership, of violence, of constant vigilance. It had marked him, changed him, but it hadn't broken him. We both got lucky, she said. Dominic pulled her close, and they swayed gently to music only they could hear, the stars watching over them like silent witnesses. Do you ever think about that voice note? Dominic asked. The one that started all of this? Emily laughed softly. All the time. Do you regret it? She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. No, because it was the first honest thing I'd said in years. I called you arrogant and dangerous and attractive, and I was right on all counts. I'm still dangerous. I know, so am I. Dominic smiled, that rare, genuine smile that made him look younger, almost carefree. Yeah, you are. He kissed her then, slow and deep, like they had all the time in the world. And maybe they did. Maybe they'd bought themselves enough time to actually live instead of just survive. When they finally pulled apart, Emily rested her forehead against his. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter who comes looking or what falls apart, we face it together. No more secrets, no more running ahead to protect me. We do this as equals or we don't do it at all." Dominic was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "I promise." "Say it." "We face it together, as equals, whatever comes." Emily exhaled, feeling something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but trust. And maybe that was better. They stayed on the terrace until the cold drove them inside, wrapped in blankets and each other, talking about nothing and everything, plans for the garden, ideas for the future, memories of the past that felt like they belonged to different people. And when they finally went to bed, Emily fell asleep with Dominic's arm around her waist and the certain knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new choices. But she'd face them all, because she wasn't the girl who'd made a mistake anymore. She was the woman who'd survived it, and that made all the difference. The end, Emily Vance had walked into Dominic Kane's office expecting to be fired. Instead, she'd been given a choice: run toward safety or walk into the fire. She'd chosen the fire, and she'd come out the other side transformed, scarred, stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. The empire they'd left behind in New York had crumbled. The FBI had moved on to easier targets. The rivals who'd wanted them dead had found new enemies. And in a villa overlooking a Swiss lake, two people who'd survived the worst the world could throw at them were building something new, something honest, something that belonged only to them. It wasn't the ending Emily had imagined when she'd sent that voice note, but it was the ending she'd earned. And in the quiet moments, when the world felt too heavy and the past too close, she'd stand in her garden and remember. She'd made a choice. She'd taken the risk. She'd walk through hell and come out alive. And she'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Because some mistakes aren't mistakes at all. They're just the beginning of something better.